She smoked cigars on the White House roof, raced cars down Pennsylvania Avenue, and carried a snake in her purse named Emily Spinach. While most women in early 20th century America were expected to smile politely and sit quietly, Alice Roosevelt did the exact opposite, and the world couldn't get enough of her. The daughter of a U.S. president and the unofficial queen of Washington high society, Alice Roosevelt Longworth wasn't just scandalous. She was electric, rebellious, and unforgettable. But behind the laughter and headlines was a life marked by tragedy, political feuds, forbidden romances, and ruthless power plays. This is the untamed and utterly scandalous story of America's original wild child, Alice Roosevelt. Alice Lee Roosevelt was born on February 12, 1884, into a world of both privilege and promise. Her father, Theodore Roosevelt, was a charismatic, rising politician in New York, and her mother, Alice Hathaway Lee Roosevelt, was a young Boston beauty admired for her grace and charm. The couple had only been married a few years and were deeply in love. Their daughter, born in the heart of winter, was supposed to mark the beginning of a golden new chapter. But just 2 days after Alice's birth, the Roosevelt household was devastated. On Valentine's Day, Alice's mother died unexpectedly from Bright's disease, a kidney condition that had gone unnoticed during pregnancy. Only hours earlier, Theodore's mother, Martha Mitty Roosevelt, also passed away in the same house from typhoid fever. In the span of a single day, Theodore lost his wife and his mother. He was shattered. In his diary that night, he marked a large black X, and beneath it wrote, "The light has gone out of my life." Grief consumed him. He couldn't bring himself to speak his wife's name again. Her portraits were taken down, her belongings packed away, and baby Alice, his newborn daughter, was left in the care of his sister, Anna Bammy Roosevelt. While he fled west to the Dakota Territory, seeking solace in the wilderness. Out on the frontier, Theodore buried himself in ranching, horseback riding, and the harshness of nature, trying to escape memories too painful to face. Back in New York, Alice was growing up without the two people who should have loved her most. One gone forever, the other emotionally unreachable. When Theodore returned and remarried his childhood friend Edith Caro, Alice was brought into their new family, but she never quite fit in. Edith treated her with cold formality, and Alice soon became aware that she was different, more spirited, more stubborn, and always on the outside looking in. That early loss, and the silence that followed it, formed the foundation of Alice's defiant personality. If no one would give her space, she would take it. If she wasn't going to be embraced, she would command attention. And soon, the quiet orphaned girl would transform into the most scandalous daughter the White House had ever known. When Theodore Roosevelt became president in 1901, following the assassination of William McKinley, his daughter Alice was just 17 years old, beautiful, bold, and already gaining a reputation as a troublemaker. But when her father moved into the White House, Alice didn't simply step into the role of first daughter. She took it by storm. Almost overnight, she became the most talked about woman in America. She smoked cigarettes on the roof of the White House, chewed gum during state dinners, and snuck out to parties unchaperoned. Acts that were shocking for any young woman at the time, let alone the daughter of the president. Alice wore bright blue dresses and wide-brimmed hats that drew attention wherever she went. She carried herself not like a debutante, but like a star. And the press couldn't get enough. Photographers followed her every move. Her fashion choices made headlines. Newspapers nicknamed her Princess Alice, and crowds swarmed her public appearances. When she attended social functions, guests lined up just to catch a glimpse of her. She was dazzling, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. But behind the sparkle, there was purpose. Alice knew exactly what she was doing. She once said, "I was the daughter of an American president. I could do anything." And she meant it. Her father, ever the statesman, was both amused and exhausted by her antics. When reporters asked why he didn't try to rein her in, he famously replied, "I can either run the country, or I can attend to Alice. I cannot possibly do both." Alice's defiance wasn't just about fun, it was a statement. In a world that told women to sit quietly, she was determined to be loud. In a White House filled with rules and expectations, she chose rebellion. She wasn't afraid of scandal, she invited it. And in doing so, she became not just a first daughter, but a national phenomenon. At a time when women were barely allowed to vote, Alice Roosevelt was shaping culture, politics, and headlines simply by refusing to be what society expected her to be. And as America watched in fascination, half in horror, half in admiration, Alice Roosevelt became something the country had never seen before. A female celebrity born of politics, power, and pure will. By the time she turned 20, Alice Roosevelt had already become a full-blown sensation. But it wasn't until 1905, when she was invited on an official U.S. diplomatic tour across Asia and the Pacific, that her legend became global. It was the first time a presidential daughter had ever been included in such a high-profile mission. And while the men around her discussed treaties and trade, Alice stole every headline. On that months-long voyage through Japan, China, the Philippines, and Hawaii, Alice turned diplomacy into theater. She smoked cigarettes in public, played poker with the military officers, and jumped fully clothed into a ship's swimming pool on a dare. An act that scandalized Washington and thrilled the press. Every country she visited seemed torn between protocol and pure curiosity. She wasn't a guest, she was the show. Her most iconic accessory? A small green garter snake, which she kept in her handbag and would dramatically pull out at social gatherings. She named it Emily Spinach, because, as she explained with a sly grin, she was as thin as my Aunt Emily and as green as spinach. For many, the snake was a joke, a quirky stunt for shock value. But for Alice, it was symbolic. She was deliberately unsettling the image of womanhood that society demanded. Where other young ladies were expected to carry powder compacts and gloves, Alice carried a reptile. She was mocking convention, even as she played the belle of every ball. But beneath the headlines and laughter was something else. Keen political observation. While others dismissed her as merely wild and impulsive, Alice was listening. She was watching. She understood the room she was in, the power plays being made, and the personalities shaping the 20th century. And she remembered it all. She once described Vice President Charles Fairbanks as the most pompous man I've ever met, and called a British ambassador a stuffed fish. Her assessments were sharp, her instincts sharper. Alice Roosevelt wasn't just rebelling for fun. She was learning how power worked, how men negotiated, how leaders maneuvered, and how charm could be used like a weapon. And the whole time, she made sure the spotlight never left her. Because in a world that never intended to give her real power, she discovered something even more intoxicating: influence. And she wielded it with the flair of someone who knew exactly how dangerous she could be. In 1906, Alice Roosevelt shocked Washington again, not with scandal this time, but with a wedding. She married Nicholas Longworth, a Republican congressman from Ohio, 14 years her senior. He was wealthy, charming, and politically ambitious. On paper, it seemed like a perfect match, an elegant union between power and popularity. The wedding was a national event. Over 1,000 guests packed the White House, the first wedding ever held there. Thousands more lined the streets of Washington, hoping to catch a glimpse of Alice in her blue wedding gown, bucking tradition once again. She cut the cake with a sword borrowed from a military aide, a perfect symbol of her dramatic flair. The newspapers called it the social event of the decade. But beneath the glittering surface, cracks were already forming. The truth was, Alice and Nick Longworth didn't share much beyond status. He was a traditionalist. She was a firestorm. He valued decorum. She preferred disruption. And while he was busy building a political career, She was busy building a public image that often eclipsed his. Worse, Longworth had a well-known appetite for women, and discretion was not his strong suit. But Alice wasn't about to play the humiliated wife. She had affairs of her own. The most enduring and talked about was with Senator William Borah of Idaho, a man many believed to be the real father of her only child, Paulina, born in 1925. The resemblance, people whispered, was striking. Still, Alice never publicly acknowledged the affair, and Nick never challenged her. Their marriage, in many ways, became a truce. They understood each other's flaws, tolerated them, and occasionally weaponized them. Alice once openly mocked Nick's speeches, called him little boy, and during one of his re-election campaigns, reportedly voted for his opponent. But she stayed in the marriage, not out of romance, but out of calculation. As the wife of a prominent congressman and later Speaker of the House, she remained embedded in the political elite. Her home became a salon of influence, her sharp tongue a tool of persuasion and fear. In a city full of political wives who nodded politely and stayed in the background, Alice Roosevelt Longworth leaned in, laughed out loud, and rewrote the script entirely. By the 1920s, Alice Roosevelt Longworth was no longer just a first daughter or a political wife. She was Washington's reigning queen. With her husband now Speaker of the House, and her own reputation more powerful than ever, Alice transformed her elegant DuPont Circle mansion into the center of political gossip, influence, and strategy. Her drawing room became the unofficial hub of the Capitol. Senators, diplomats, cabinet members, even presidents, knew that if you wanted to understand Washington's mood, you went to Alice's. And if you didn't get invited, that said just as much. But Alice didn't play by the usual social rules. Her gatherings weren't tea parties. They were war rooms laced with sharp-tongued commentary and ruthless wit. She held grudges like medals and dispensed insults like party favors. She once said of Calvin Coolidge, "He looks as though he's been weaned on a pickle." Of Thomas Dewey, she quipped, "He's the little man on the wedding cake." Even her decorative pillows were weapons. The most famous read, "If you can't say something good about someone, sit right here by me." She was adored by journalists and feared by politicians, because she could make or break reputations with a single cutting remark. But she wasn't just a gossip, she was a political player. She campaigned for her father, her husband, her friends, and later, even for enemies of her family. Her independence knew no bounds. Perhaps her most famous feud was with Eleanor Roosevelt, her cousin by marriage and ideological opposite. Alice mocked Eleanor's frumpy clothes and self-righteous tone, calling her a do-gooder, and accusing her of being humorless. Their rivalry wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. Eleanor stood for a new kind of progressive, policy-focused womanhood. Alice, ever the rebel, championed style, sarcasm, and old-school power brokering. Yet even those who despised Alice knew they couldn't ignore her. She was a kingmaker without a crown. Her opinions were quoted in newspapers, her approval courted by candidates. She had no official office, no elected title, but in the backrooms and ballrooms of Washington, she pulled strings all the same. Alice had become something America wasn't used to seeing. A woman with no filter, no fear, and no need to apologize for either. Despite her glittering public life, Alice Roosevelt's later years were marked by quiet tragedy and reflection. Her only daughter, Paulina Longworth, struggled with depression and addiction, battles that deeply pained Alice but remained largely private. In 1957, Paulina died from a drug overdose, leaving behind a daughter, Joanna, whom Alice took in and raised herself. It was a painful reminder that even the brightest stars can have dark shadows. As decades passed, Alice became a living symbol of a bygone era, a link between the horse and buggy world of the late 19th century and the modern age of jet planes and television. She never lost her sharp wit, her flamboyant hats, or her refusal to conform. Throughout her long life, she remained fiercely independent, once declaring, "I've always believed in the adage, Don't apologize, don't explain. Alice outlived most of the politicians she had influenced and watched the country change in ways she could scarcely have imagined. She saw presidents from Benjamin Harrison all the way to Jimmy Carter, and though her politics shifted over the years, her spirit remained unbroken. She was more than a political figure's daughter or a socialite. She was a force of nature who had reshaped the idea of what a woman in power could be. She lived by her own rules, challenging expectations at every turn, and in doing so, created a legacy that echoes through American history. When Alice Roosevelt Longworth died in 1980 at the age of 96, the nation lost not just a celebrity but a trailblazer, a woman who dared to be scandalous, outspoken, and utterly unforgettable. Her story remains a reminder that sometimes, the most powerful way to be remembered is simply to live boldly and never apologize for it. Alice Roosevelt wasn't just America's first daughter. She was a force of nature, a scandal magnet, and a woman who refused to be ignored. Her wild spirit and sharp wit changed the rules of power and fame forever. If you loved diving into the untamed life of America's most scandalous princess, hit that like button, subscribe for more incredible stories, and ring the bell so you never miss a video. Who should we explore next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. And remember, history is full of secrets just waiting to be uncovered. Thanks for watching.